The pale morning light did not warm the stone courtyard where a woman in white linen stood motionless while a circle of veiled priestesses chanted a hymn that sounded like a lament. The bronze blade scraped her hair until only exposed, humiliated skin remained. In the records, they called her a virgin priestess. In that moment, she was neither virgin nor priestess. She was property. Her name was Amunet, just over 20 years old, daughter of a merchant swallowed by debts that were now being paid with the family's own flesh. The man who handed her over did not look back. The temple, supposedly a refuge of devotion, justice, and protection, was also a living vault where bodies were accepted as tribute. When the priest said, "Your name no longer belongs to you," it wasn't a symbolic ritual. It was the complete erasure of her existence. What you're about to see is neither legend nor moral exaggeration. These are fragments of archives, mutilated papyri, lists of dependents, and anonymous bones. If you want to understand how purity became an economic weapon, subscribe, because this investigation reveals what the temples did everything to hide. The temple preached order and benevolence, but internal records show another mechanism operating behind the liturgy. In tax scrolls and votive inscriptions appear categories that are anything but pious: consecrated, initiated, dependents. The institution offered loans and charged vows in return, and a vow could be land, an animal, or a person. On the walls, priests proclaimed themselves guardians of purity. In private papers, they negotiated years of service from women registered as assets. A law recovered in the Eastern Archive defined these transfers as temporary, but other lists show lifelong servitude and children born inside the walls with no civil identity outside them. It wasn't an administrative error, it was a structure. Misery, devotion, and debt transformed into religious ownership. Those who entered to serve the god rarely emerged whole, if they emerged at all. Amunet's path began in a winter of ruined harvests. The family's poverty wasn't an event, but a slow landslide. As a child, she learned to weave in the smell of damp clay. At 12, she understood how a simple loaf of bread could become debt in the hands of a scribe. Her father, Beck, worked for a merchant who trusted credit more than gold. One single natural disaster became 3 loans. Amunet cleaned courtyards for coins and learned hymns at night, believing that serving the gods brought protection. Meanwhile, her name slid through the archives, from daughter to dependent to transfer. At 21, facing an emergency tax the family couldn't pay, the merchant offered the pious agreement: surrender one of the daughters to the temple. They called it an honor. It was survival. Neferu, the eldest priestess, inspected Amunet like someone examining a rare object, and approved her suitability. Within a month, she would cross the gate, and her life would be rewritten by hands that had never seen her pain. The capture of bodies did not follow a single method. Sometimes, families offered someone to delay ruin. Other times, entire villages were raided and their inhabitants marked for service. In extreme cases, decrees forced subjugated cities to deliver women annually. A note from Horam, a meticulous scribe, describes a convoy with 19 people. 3 with hands tied, clothes torn, smelling of seawater. The others walking with the passivity of those who have stopped resisting. The fragmented testimony shows the raw dialogue. Horam asks where they are going. The guard replies, "To the northern temple. They will serve the god." The elder Ipu asks if they will return. The guard says, "Some," and adds, "The man who sold them is now free." No promises, only transactions. The dust of the roads, the wooden bells hanging from their necks, the scent of burnt incense masking fear, everything turned people into inventory. The papyri list origins, ages, physical condition, and destination, as if each life were just another item in sacred stock. The ritual of submission was a mixture of worship, contract, and sentence. The initiate walked to the altar while Neferu recited a list of renunciations, and the scribe Hui recorded every word to seal the new identity. The brief exchange of vows hid a deep violence. Neferu asked, "Do you renounce your name?" Amunet answered, "I renounce it." The priest Menketh confirmed, "Your family is free of the debt, and you belong to the house." It wasn't a metaphor, it was ownership. The heavy incense burned the throat, the bronze reflected a dim light, and the cold floor reminded her that from then on, every step would be watched. This ritual fulfilled 4 brutal functions. It normalized the surrender of the body, created written proof against any contestation, decreed social death through the name change, and initiated permanent surveillance. For the women, the psychological break began there, between muffled chants and the certainty that they would never again be seen as people outside those walls. The day began with a sharp bell that didn't wake, it commanded. Tasks ranged from weaving, preparing offerings, tending sacred pools, copying texts, or cooking for the clergy. Aset, a veteran, taught the novices to press barley dough until it didn't crack. Perfection was required even in sacrificial bread. Corridors and gardens offered no refuge. Sapta made daily rounds noting who complied or failed. The sounds were always the same: the scraping of a stylus on a tablet, the clack of ceramics, rough ropes binding bundles, murmurs of inspection. Rebellion? Almost always silent. Merit hid a small idol sewn into her clothing to remember she had once been someone. When it was discovered, she was punished with more work and less food. The recurring presence of characters like Merit, Neferu, Hui, and Menketh showed that the temple worked like a machine, each one turning the gears that kept obedience and fear perfectly aligned. The so-called sacred unions were the darkest point, where religion and coercion became inseparable. Certain women were elevated to titles such as Wife of the God or Divine Mother. In stone, it looked like honor. In practice, it was institutionalized sexual submission. In one recorded ceremony, the priest Kepper murmured formulas while the scribe updated the woman's status and a physician noted fertile cycles to control reproduction. The tension is evident. Kepper says the union will make the woman pure. Amunet asks if she can refuse. The response? Refusal restores the debt to the family, meaning ruin. The priest's hand rested in a bowl of heavy oil, its sweet smell mixing with the stench of burning candles, and the metal of the records giving off something like old coins. The result? Pregnancies with no civil identity, children registered only as temple property, and an entire lineage erased in the shadows of the cult. To resist was to whisper so as not to disappear. Many wrote pleas for help on shards of pottery and hid them under floors or seams. Others tried to flee or appeal to external authorities. A preserved dialogue shows the clash between magistrate Senu and the clerk Patju. Senu demands that some women be returned to their families. Patju replies, "The temple's book says they belong to us." It was a dispute between civil law and religious power, and the temple almost always won, invoking ritual secrecy. Intercepted convoys triggered clashes with desperate villages. Elder Ipu, who had carved a plea into a jar, was flogged when discovered. The scribe Horam nearly incited revolt by reading falsified lists publicly. The crowd threw mud at the temple wall before Neferu restored order. Each of these episodes left marks in documents and scars on bodies, reminders that the temple punished any attempt to break the silence. The epilogue follows the trail of revelations, fragmented and stubborn. 1 month after a petition circulated in the market, Senu filed a formal complaint, and his notes in the margins of a ledger suggest intense judicial battles. 3 months later, an archaeological team led by Dr. Lewis discovered a sealed chamber filled with shards inscribed by women begging to be remembered. These fragments confirmed connections between debts, tributes, and human deliveries. 6 months after the initial publication, community groups demanded public remembrance and proper registration of forgotten graves. Researchers cross-referenced lists of dependents with civil records and found invisible children buried anonymously. Ossuaries revealed bodies with no adornments, matching the women who existed only as numbers. Academic discussions split: servitude, religious slavery, social obligation. The debate left university halls and reached movements for reparations and preservation. The history buried beneath polished stone finally began to be heard. The memory of Amunet, and of the others, still fights to exist. The temple still gleams in photos, but beneath the floor, archaeologists found scattered coins, broken amulets, and unnamed bones. Among them, one fragment read only, "Remember me." The lesson is direct. The language of purity can be a tool of power, and when an institution claims sanctity, it is often claiming ownership. How do we remember places that celebrate beauty while hiding wounds? By listening to the shards, to the margins of records, to the whispered names that survived erasure. If these women deserve memory, counting them accurately is the least we can do. Share this video if you believe these voices cannot disappear, and subscribe to follow our investigation as we recover fragments, restore names, and return humanity to those who were treated as offerings.